Ron.
So Seta, introduce yourself first in Persian and then in this.
No, I don't think it's fair.
And then this new language.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair. But all I'm gonna say is that in Farsi, when you introduce yourself, you know, in English, we say the first name and then you pause and then you say your last name. So you say Chris Wolf, you say Mehdi. If I want to say it would be Mehdi Verzai, right? But then in Farsi, you actually put a vowel sound in between, and you basically say Christopher Wolf or Chris Wolf. So everybody calls me Seta Afshordi, and it's kind of awkward. But anyways, in Farsi, if I wanted to introduce myself, first of all, my first name is Setayesh. It's not Seta, it's Setayesh, but I made it easier. But so if I wanted to introduce myself, my name is Setayesh Afshordi. So it rhymes better, you know, it sounds nicer, like a little bit Italian vowel sounds. But anyways, I'm Seta Afshordi. And so I think I probably, because we're presenting Amir, I'll say a little bit more about myself. Is that what you want? Yeah. So that means I should say I'm 40 years old. I'm quite old.
You can judge, but you can say the age of your heart.
That's not, yeah. Anyway, so I was born and raised in Iran, in the capital of Iran. I did my undergrad in chemical engineering in Iran in a university called Sharif University. Full disclosure, I don't know if my brother's here or not. I just went to that university because my brother went to that university. I was so into sports. I loved sports, and I was always just either horse riding, badminton, tennis, volleyball, swimming. I loved sports, and I started actually becoming very good in badminton. So I was the youngest national player in Iran. So I was 12 when I joined national team. And obviously I preferred to just play sports, but my brother was this genius guy, and he's only 2 years older than me. And I feel ashamed when people talk about his grades and my grades are not good. So I'm constantly trying to compete. He went to talented school. I tried to get into that school. I was rejected. I didn't pass the exam. So I tried it for junior high. I tried it for high school, still didn't get admitted to talented.
She was turned away for attitude. It wasn't in lack of intelligence.
No, that was his exam. Anyway, so finally I said, you know what? I failed for junior high. I failed for high school, but for university, I got to go where he goes. So obviously my brother was, he went to Sharif University, which is the best technical engineering school of the country. And then I just studied so hard in the last year. I basically, believe it or not, I slept every other night for a year to study, to be able to catch up with what I missed throughout the high school, because I was constantly in camps and playing sports. So I was missing a lot. So the last year of high school, I slept every other night to be able to catch up. So finally I made it to the university. Still at university, my brother's marks was way better than me. When I got there, everybody was like, oh, Nia's sister is here, so you're gonna be top student. And I'm like, no pressure, please. No, I'm not that good. I'm just here by mistake. But anyways, so I continued playing badminton, and I finished my chemical engineering degree in Iran. And I think the day that I submitted my thesis, the next day I had to fly to Sweden to do my master's in environmentally sustainable process technologies. I did that for 2 years. After that, I joined Schlumberger as a field engineer in wireline department. I did schooling in Scotland for 5 months for Schlumberger, and I spent 1.5 years in Oman working for Schlumberger. And finally, in 2007, end of 2007, they transferred me to Calgary. A few months after that, I joined Husky Energy, and since then, I worked for big oil and gas producers. Now, when I joined oil companies, most of my classmates back in Sweden told me that you're a trader. Why are you working for oil and gas companies? We believe in environmental technologies. Why are you doing that? And I said, you know what? At the end of the day, I think the change has to happen from within. I don't think it makes sense to fight from outside. I think we should get in there. And then if we really believe that we're smart, we should help them understand their mistake, or help them see better how they can make a difference and change their processes. Basically it took me 10 years to finally get to Proton Technologies, a company that has an idea that they can reform and change what's happening in oil and gas, take advantage of the reservoir, take advantage of all of these resources and energy that's hidden and it's unrecovered in the reservoir underground, and still bring it to surface and make us live cleaner, but still have access to energy. The story of me joining Proton started in 2000. I think it was end of 2016. I was working for an oil company. I was managing an asset in Saskatchewan. Someone contacted me that there is a company called Proton Technologies. They've got this patent and technology. They got a grant from the government. To be able to do it, they need a field. Are we allowed to enter your field? Can I connect you? So I was an operations manager at the time. I told them, yeah, sure. I was actually very interested in what they're doing. When I figured out that finally this is something that's interesting, we're talking about hydrogen, we're talking about something greener than what's happening in the heavy oil world. I said, yeah, for sure. To be honest, believe it or not, I didn't even get approval from my management. I made an executive decision that yes, I'll sign this letter of intent. And yeah, so that's how the whole connection started. Unfortunately, the company I was working for was publicly traded in 2016. Most of the oil companies were struggling. There was a recession. So they went into bankruptcy in 2017. At that time, Proton contacted me that we are ready to test our technology in your field. I told them, I'm sorry, I'm not even managing that field. That company is actually in receivership. But I think if you really think this is the right field, which I believe it is the right field for you, maybe you should try to buy the asset, because I think most of the oil companies out there are going to have a hard time allowing you to enter their field and try new technology. And there would be a lot of politics. And I think they were fortunate enough to raise enough money to put an offer and purchase the asset. Once the asset was purchased, they contacted me and I joined Proton's family in August of 2017. Probably a few months after I met Grant Strem. They told me the brain behind all of this thing is going to arrive tomorrow. And I was waiting for a very old fat guy to show up. But
she was half right.
Anyways, so that is me. I started working for Proton as an operations manager. I think after 1.5, 2 years, I got promoted to COO. However, full disclosure, when I became COO, we were 6 people in the company. So right now we are 50 people and I'm happy to be here. Grant, can you say what's your name in Farsi?
Granta Strem, and the age of my heart is somewhere between 7 years old and 14. I'm hoping maybe in the next decade to advance that range about 1 year. I don't know if I ever want to get past 15 in my heart though. So anyways, I guess it's my turn. So first off, thank you, Seta, for joining our company and leading it very well. And I say leading because I think that most of the day-to-day decisions and budgeting, stringency, and we call her the conservative engineer, the grounded one, the person who puts the brakes on most of the things I want to go do right away. She paces it out and breaks it into steps and assigns it to experts. And it's been a joy to have it all coming alive, like on a global basis, because I think it's a big concept that the world can use and can need. I'll start a little bit with my background. I've always been a little bit, had a hard time just complying with what the authority figures around me were saying without questioning the logic. And that was true, I think, from an early age, but also in my early career within the oil and gas sector. So I'm somebody who lays awake at night thinking about alternatives and different scenarios and the distant future and things that really annoy the people who break things into pragmatic steps. So thank you for your patience. So one of the things that, okay, I guess my background is I'm a geologist. I came out of, I started with a philosophy degree and then worked in northern Alberta in a bush camp with 90 people, 90 men, and 4 of them had philosophy degrees. And I thought I better reconsider my plausibility of being able to feed kids and that type of stuff. So I switched into geology, which at the time in Calgary was still respected as something where you could make a go of it and have a successful career. It's much harder now. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it mostly boils down to the difference between exploration concepts and statistical concepts. So if you have a large statistical play that's wide ranging, like a shale play or an oil sands play, you can drill hundreds of wells and have a pretty good idea that they're falling on a bell curve that's acceptable to you. An exploration portfolio is a different mindset where you know that you have a thesis and you want to test an idea, and whoever's funding it is pretty sure that individually each of these crazy ideas will fail, but the ones that don't will much more than offset the losses for the ones that fail. So I was very attracted to this exploration portfolio mindset and encouraged in it and trained in it early in my career. And I felt fortunate for that. But I think it's mostly done now, not entirely, but on a worldwide basis. Most of these concepts for developing resources have gone towards statistical approaches as opposed to thesis approaches, which require the evaluation of subtle clues, much like a detective. And I just love the exploration side of the business, where there's an enormous array of possibilities and trying to find the path through and which ones are relevant and which ones are not, and turn that into something successful has always been, I guess, deeply intriguing to me since I've been a geologist. I did an engineering master's at one point, mostly engineering courses in reservoir characterization, which is it focused mainly on the study of oil and gas reservoirs and fluid dynamics within pore space. So trying to optimize systems and simulate results. I worked for various oil and gas producers. I mentioned earlier, I don't always stick to my knitting, as they say. I say, why are we knitting this sweater? Could we do it a different color? Should we make a blanket instead? What other concepts are possible? And as a result of this, I think that it may or may not have been I've been laid off by the oil and gas industry 3 times. And I'm not sure, I still don't know how much of it was because of this tendency within me and how much was macroeconomic forces. I'd like to think because usually it was the whole team gone, that they weren't singling me out, because I seem to get good reviews. But yeah, in any case, it was a challenging environment and a challenging career to work my way through. So one of the interesting things, I guess, along that vein of thought, in terms of looking at clues, sometimes the clues stare you in the face. And I grew very unsettled by the fact that there is so much sand in northern Alberta. One of the things that just really caught my attention full on was the geological models that suggest to make a grain of a sand bed that has a certain amount of purity requires a mountain range of a certain size, a certain distance away, and everything else kind of dissolves on the way and the grains end up here. But if you look at the angularity and the volume and bedding structures and things, I was unsatisfied with the volumetric analysis from sort of the old-fashioned traditional method since the invention of plate tectonics, and thought there is way too much sand to be accounted for by what I'm being told in my training course. And not only that, I think the volume of hydrocarbons is hard to justify. You know, you have 1,000-kilometer journey from this down dip source rock. Maybe some of it made it up there, but is this 2 to 10 trillion barrel system on the 1,000 kilometers away with 0.5%, up dip, is that really possible? So I started asking all these big questions. The amount of magnesium that is required to make the Canadian dolomite. These types of things were just not sitting well with me. And I started thinking more of it as a chemical system. There's a whole bunch of rabbit holes that I won't address in relation to Proton here, but I'm just saying this to give you a better sense for my thinking path as I noticed that quite simplistically, and it's everybody knows this who's been through any sort of combustion physics background, that hydrocarbons are hydrogen and carbon primarily. And I think this is lost on most people who day to day, they just think of it as oil and on we go. But I guess there's always been an inquisitive side to me. And I had the good fortune of meeting a good friend, Dr. Ian Gates, during the course of my master's degree, which I did evenings and weekends while I was working at ConocoPhillips. But Ian Gates, we stayed friends long after, about a decade after I graduated from that master's program. He said, Grant, I just came across this data set where they made up to 40% hydrogen in their gas stream by accident. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. 40%. And everybody, even 5-6 years ago, it was not a mystery that the world was trying to decarbonize. CO2 is the enemy. There's all these discussions about, the emissions of coal. This is old news, and it was already progressing from more carbon intensive sources of energy to less carbon intensive. So it was unsurprising to me. And hydrogen was already a growing voice, especially in Europe, where I had spent quite a bit of time in that time span. So I thought, well, hydrogen is a constituent of the oil or gas, and it's a constituent of the H2O. And that's basically all the fluids that are down there. So it's an enormously hydrogen rich system in every single oil and gas deposit around the world. And if they're injecting oxygen can bring up high percentages of hydrogen, all we would really need is a filter of some kind to keep everything else down in the well and then bring up only the hydrogen to surface. So that was the initial concept, the initial thesis. At the time I had a little oil company, and which anyway, that's another rabbit hole that's for another time. But the concept of just taking the hydrogen from these very energy rich systems, it struck me as a very efficient way to produce energy. So oxidizing oil and gas is done in a couple billion cars all over the world. It's done in turbines and power generators and home heating systems, furnaces and stoves. And so all that's really happening is we're taking hydrocarbons and oxidizing them. Well, if we know that most oil fields are abandoned while they're still more than half full, and I didn't go into detail on all the different places I worked, but one was a reserves evaluation company and one was a bank. And I guess a whole bunch of these different experiences and companies allowed me to very strongly recognize the enormous size of hydrocarbon deposits worldwide. And if the price of natural gas goes up like $1 or $2, the amount of extra resource that is now economic and producible, economic reserves, they go way up. And that's the same with oil. If oil is like $150 a barrel or something, suddenly economic reserves worldwide go way up. And it's not that the resource size has changed, it's just what's economically producible. And it's enormous. Our technology has been improving with horizontal drilling and fracking, steam-assisted gravity drainage. All these different technologies have made it cheaper and cheaper and more efficient to get these hydrocarbon resources to surface. But they're still mostly in the ground at the time a project gets abandoned. So if we can just take oxygen out of the air, which is everywhere on the planet, and get it into these pressure vessels, which are the oil fields themselves, which are preloaded with decades or centuries of fuel, then it makes, I think, a whole lot of sense to try and only harvest that hydrogen. And it's not just about CO2. Personally, I don't have strong feelings about greenhouse gases and CO2, but I really do about air pollution and efficiency. So if we can drop the cost, worldwide, we spend about $6 trillion a year as a species on energy. Imagine if we only had to spend $2 trillion a year. What else could we do with that $4 trillion that we're literally burning worldwide? I would like to see a $4 trillion worldwide space program. I would like to see all sorts of, preventative medicine and the amount of services and directions and artwork and you name it, with an extra $4 trillion a year available to humanity would just open our potential to a vastly greater future. So that's one aspect. I also really don't like millions and millions of people per year dying of air pollution. If you look at a website called theworldcounts.com and air pollution site, so far this year, as of today, 3.7 million people have died from air pollution. And this is not a hotly contested number. It's like, yeah, all the experts go, yeah, if anything, it might be understated, but it's somewhere in the millions, like by June 2nd of this year, which is way in advance of COVID. It's way in advance of a whole bunch of things that we spend ridiculous amounts of effort preventing. Like we might spend billions of dollars. Well, anyway, that's another rabbit hole I'll leave aside. I don't like air pollution, and I think we can solve it. So fuel cell vehicles have no tailpipe emissions within cities. That's a high priority. And getting these systems in our electrical loads and in our home heating and in our industrial processes, our smelting of ores, our creation of steels and cements and raw goods, and even fertilizers for dropping the price and land footprint of agriculture. There's so many advantages to extremely clean, low-cost hydrogen that it's hard to overstate. So anyway, I guess 5 or 6 years ago, I didn't see all of this at the time or all the implications of this at the time, but I think I saw most of the main points and wanted to drive forward on this business on an aggressive track. And I was lucky to have some supporters around me and family and friends who helped me do crazy things like buy this giant dead oil field that was shut in for 5 minutes when we bought it. And like I say, Seta came with the acquisition. I didn't know about that till long after they hired her. But at the time, I was trying to just be kind of a board level scientist. But now for the last several years, I've been the CEO. And I'm excited by the potential that I see and what we can do. So I don't think it needs a whole lot of further prognostication. That will come as Seta fires up the presentation and we walk our way through it. I think Seta is going to do some parts. I'll do some parts.
Yeah,
It'll be
a
little back and forth
together. I mean, was that enough introduction?
Yep.
All right. Have you shared this?
And and by that I mean it was great. Thank you, guys.
It's like, stop talking,
Yeah.
Grant.
35 minutes in. Whoops.
Yeah, just be mindful of the time. We want to give our audience a chance to join the conversation.
Okay.
Okay. So there's 3 main differentiators for proton technologies, and the first is cost. Every industrial process reveals its efficiency somewhat through the lens of cost, and we think that we are dramatically lower than the alternatives. We expect our first big project, and by big I mean 500 tons a day or more, to be less than 25 cents per kilogram, which is certainly lower than half the price of any alternative that I've seen out there. In most cases, hydrogen's like, if you're talking about green hydrogen with electrolysis, about $1.50. Yet the next thing is that our carbon intensity can be far below 0. And that is also relatively unique to our process. And the fact that we can leverage existing wells, existing sites, existing disturbances, power lines, roads, even towns, to repurpose them for our process means that we also have the smallest ecological disturbance of any that I've come across. So with all of these factors, we think it's actually feasible and realistic to get to 10% of the world's energy supply by 2040, which would require about 1,700 of our large facilities. According to the math we currently have, that'll be tuned up or down through time, but that's our current target, and we think it's achievable.
Hey, hold on, I want to talk about the picture. So on the top, it's good. It's interesting for you to see. In 2018, we had to run a test. So one of the other co-founders of Proton is Ian Gates. In the picture, he's in the middle. He's one of the profs at the U of C. Jackie is another prof that he's always working with Ian Gates. The one at the bottom that's bundled up is me. And of course, the other one is Grant. And just so you know, it was minus 40 degrees in Saskatchewan in February of 2018 when we were running this test. And the picture at the bottom, we are repeating our test. Of course, it's modified, improved, and upgraded. This time is inside a black box. And the box that you see in the bottom, it's a new improvement and a new demonstration that we're running. Actually, we're running a test in it right now today. This new test started a few months ago in March of 2021.
So I guess one of the main points that people have or objections they have to oil development is all this carbon dioxide and all this air pollution and these challenges that come with it. First off, I'm not against lubricants for rotary equipment. I'm not against asphalt for pavement. I'm not actually against most final goods, although I think microplastics has a lot of improvement to handle. I'm generally in favor of using oil for making things that require carbon, but I'm not in favor of just burning it. And I think the economics are going to get more and more absurd to watch as we just continue burning this stuff. Nobody likes it. It's unnecessary. And currently a lot of it gets burned within cities. It's, our grandchildren will hear stories of this and think it was so weird how people used to be allowed to just burn oil all over the place in every city. But there are these giant deposits all around that are full of energy, like this Athabasca deposit, for example. The one oil field has 2 trillion barrels of oil. We have our demo site is 10,000 times smaller, but still we think it can support 1,000 tons a day hydrogen for 25 years. So these numbers are relatively scalable and limited by the oxygen. So our process, we also recently brought the North Sea rights. Huge amount of infrastructure, huge desire to decarbonize. So we're working towards that. There's platforms to postpone the abandonment liability of. If we can use the same wells and infrastructure to make clean energy for the next several decades, no reason to abandon those.
Just to clarify something about who Proton is, when Grant mentioned, so basically when Grant and Ian Gates came up with this idea, they decided to write patents. We basically by now have 3 patents, am I right? 3 patents, the 4th one is coming?
Almost a 4th.
Yeah, so 3 patents. They decided to initially incorporate a company in British Virgin Islands. And the idea is that the patent is going to be registered in all of the countries, probably around about 100 countries right now. And then I think 80 of them are almost approved. And then the idea is that each country is going to have their own subsidiary or their own branch or similar to Proton Canada to start using the license from Proton BVI. So basically, it's fair to say that Proton Canada was the very first branch that Proton started. And we decided to basically demonstrate everything here in Canada. And over time, we figured out that we can actually add North Sea to that as well. That's why Grant was talking about North Sea in the previous slide. Now, I guess the simplest question is, so what is it that Proton is constantly talking about? So Proton, based on the discovery that they figured out in Margaret Lake in 1980, then in the process of producing oil, they ended up producing hydrogen as well. So we all went back and looked at what they were doing. Basically, what happens when you inject oxygen into hydrocarbon and you heat up hydrocarbon to temperatures above 600 degrees, some chemical reactions happens. There are different names, there are 40 of them. The most famous one is gasification and water gas shift. During these reactions, hydrogen gets released. Now, it's the art that belongs to us. How are we going to actually recover this hydrogen from the reservoir? So the hydrogen gets created in the formation. You basically, excuse me, use ground as your reactor to lead these chemical reactions by injecting oxygen into the reservoir. And then what we propose is putting a membrane downhole to extract hydrogen to the surface and leave everything downhole, everything else downhole. However, you can actually bring all of the gases to the surface, which probably the majority of it would be hydrogen, and separate the hydrogen in the reservoir. That's the simplest thing that we can explain how Proton process is. Now, this is not very weird if you look at it, or it's not something that we are trying to prove, because it's basically a combination of 2 processes that are already proven. The fact that injecting oxygen in the reservoir produces hydrogen is proven because in the 1980s, BP had a project that produced it. The fact that membranes are out there or separation units are out there that they can separate hydrogen from any type of syngas, that's proven too, because right now 95% of the hydrogen of the world is being created in a process called steam methane reforming. They do the same thing. They basically burn methane and then reform steam, H2O, and then they separate hydrogen. And they basically use the same thing. They either use pressure swing absorption or they use membranes to separate hydrogen. So we're basically talking about combining two proven processes to get to one process that nobody has ever done it. And we've got an example. We always say it's like putting wheels on your suitcases. It seems very easy. Nobody knows why in the past ever people did that. But if you look at some of the old movies, or if you remember our grandparents, they had the suitcases that they were heavy and they were always carrying it. And then when we look back and we look at that, we say, how come they never thought of these little wheels? They could have done it, right? But it took a while for somebody to figure that. That's what's happening here. It's not impossible. It's not, we haven't come up with this very weird idea. We just happen to be very clever, I think, at the right moment, at the right place, thinking about the right thing.
It's about that level, yeah.
Yeah.
Only it's in a niche that, suitcase manufacturers should have noticed.
Yeah, and then there is one more thing, sorry. I think you find it interesting to know, they're always talking about different colors of hydrogen. So green hydrogen, blue hydrogen. It's all based on how much emission is created throughout production of that hydrogen. There is a lot of discussions around what we do, because everybody says you're producing hydrogen from oil reservoirs at the end of the day. So you are breaking hydrocarbon bonds to produce your hydrogen. So yours is not considered green. I absolutely am against it, because I think it doesn't matter where it comes from. It's the matter of, in the process of producing it, did you create any emission, and was there carbon in that emission? Ours is not going to have it. Anyway, because we couldn't win the battle, we decided to give it a new name, and we call our hydrogen clear hydrogen. You don't want to put it in the category of green or blue. We call it clear hydrogen.
So the main differentiating point about our color, and actually I think anybody else who is below zero can also call themselves clear, is that our carbon intensity is lower than zero. So if you're, for example, making a windmill, there are cement and steel in the foundation that had to get transported there, and there's road construction and materials, and it all goes up there. And there is some, in the life cycle of that system, some carbon intensity associated with it. So it's always above zero, even though once it's running and installed, yes, other than the maintenance guy's truck, which may or may not have a carbon intensity, once it's up and running, a windmill is basically about zero once it's going. But on life cycle analysis basis, no matter what, that windmill will be above zero. I shouldn't say no matter what, that's another rabbit hole. But all of the traditional ways of going to make hydrogen and getting towards zero have a positive integer as the number for their carbon intensity. And everyone's talking about net zero. And I don't understand how the whole world is talking about getting to zero while everything in their entire portfolio, including wind and solar, has a positive carbon intensity. You cannot get to zero unless you have something that brings you, offsets those with a negative number. So mathematically, this seems like an extremely simple concept, yet the whole world is talking about getting to net zero using processes that have a positive carbon intensity. So anyway, so I created the carbon intensity ometer so people can have a better visual representation to understand that, if you want to actually net out your positives, you must have negatives. This is an example where I show Suncor's 2019 emissions of 22 megatons. And if they just burned 2,500 tons a day of our product anywhere in their process, they can make steam with it, they can, make electricity with it, they can just burn it in a furnace. And if they do that, because of the negative carbon intensity, they can actually get below zero, or below their net zero. So I guess I made the point. I feel passionate about it. Back to you, Seta.
So another reason that Proton, I guess a lot of people are talking about Proton, and we are proud, is that our method of hydrogen production It's supposed to be cheaper, or we halfly have proven that's going to be cheaper than other existing methods out there. And just to back up and explain a little bit more, it's not the very first time that people started looking into hydrogen as a source of energy, but they could never convince anyone to do it because it was never economical. It was always so expensive. So we have an example. People never stopped killing whales for the oil that comes from the wells as a source of energy. They stopped doing it when the price of crude oil became cheaper than that. So they didn't feel bad about whales. They just found another source of energy that was cheaper. Now, we figured that if you really want to replace heavy oil or any source of oil or hydrocarbon as a source of energy, we need to prove that our method of hydrogen production is going to be cheaper. So you can buy hydrogen cheaper than diesel, you can buy hydrogen cheaper than even natural gas. Now, the majority of the hydrogen of the world right now, 95% is coming from a technology called steam methane reforming. In this graph, you can see the economics around steam methane reforming, whether they generate carbon, so whether it's a blue hydrogen or it's not a blue hydrogen, you
Okay, I don't know if it's just me or Seta and Grant are not.
It's not
present.
just you.
Okay. All right, we're going to pause a little bit to see if we can get them back.
Well, you know what? I noticed the timing, so maybe I'll be very quick. We basically, what we are showing here is that the cost of other methods, steam methane reforming, whether they're capturing CO2 or not, is going to be higher than us because they have to build a huge infrastructure, and then they're supposed to buy natural gas as a source of fuel to use it to be able to produce hydrogen. So you can see that in total, the cost of purchasing natural gas and then the capital cost of building their facilities is going to be way higher than us. When you look at the amount of CapEx and OpEx, the reason our OpEx is so low is that we're basically not purchasing any natural gas and we're not using any huge infrastructure. We're using ground as a reactor. And then in some cases, we're actually using existing infrastructures, abandoned wells, where the wells, suspended wells are supposed to be abandoned. We're going to use those. So, so it's very easy math to look at this and prove that our method is going to be cheaper than other methods.
But if you go into districts where there is a carbon tax, the game changes even further and quite dramatically.
Like B.C?
I'm trying to advance the slide.
Okay.
All right, so this is how it looks. In Canada, for example, by 2030, there will be $170 per ton carbon tax. If it's just normal steam methane reforming, they call it the gray hydrogen, full emissions, the carbon tax makes this uneconomic by comparison to just about any reasonable electrolysis at scale project. So forget about that. It's not even possible. By comparison, Norway in Canadian dollars will be about $290 a ton. At least at the time of exchange rates, this presentation was made, maybe it's 280 or 300. But you can see that if people are paying us some portion of what they would otherwise pay the government to let these CO2 emissions go, or if they are paying us to offset their emissions, some portion from direct air capture, for example, the amount of revenue that we can bring in and the cost structure, the payment structure, just like we could give away all the hydrogen that we make for all time and still make a fortune just by sequestering huge volumes of CO2. Theoretically, like it's not the intended first step of the business 5 years ago, but recognizing that we can do this at super low cost is helpful. To give it a sense of scale, Alberta has about 250 million tons per year of carbon dioxide. If you multiply that by 170, it's a $40 billion drag on the economy. This, like, not less than 9 years from now, that will be absolutely catastrophic to the economy. Like, that will completely unwind the industry if dramatic changes are not made now.
Mm-hmm. Should we, because I'm looking at time, should we just let
speed it up?
Yeah, no,
Great.
I'm thinking maybe open it for questions. Amir, what do you think? till 7:30.
Yeah, and is this your last slide?
Yeah.
few.
Maybe I'll just dwell on this one for a bit.
He likes this
I think
one.
it's good to show one of the big puzzle pieces. We're not the whole solution. We can pull oxygen and CO2 from other sources, like electrolysis. One thing that's widely disregarded in these hydrogen from electrolysis projects worldwide is that 8/9 of the mass that they produce is oxygen, pure oxygen. And to just waste it and vent it to the atmosphere seems like a totally crazy idea to me. It can be put to very good productive use with our process and other very useful processes for clean energy. We can pull them in through using the Venturi effect through various methods. And we also have some patents filed around accelerating the transformation of carbon dioxide into carbonates. So when this happens, they also release hydrogen when you form carbonates. So anyway, it's a very efficient process. It solves a whole bunch of problems, and we can deal with, well, I think Proton's like a total interesting concept for global energy from a bunch of perspectives. We've got a very exciting team, a bunch of great shareholders. And I do have to pause and show this screenshot about air pollution. I think it's like crazy that nobody's talking about this. 3.7 million deaths from air pollution today, year to date. This is a total crisis, and hydrogen will be one of the building blocks that helps with that. I was told to make a slide that shows our Wayblaze crowdfunding.
Oh, I wanted to talk about it, and the reason is because obviously this is so some people might be interested in knowing that. So of course, it's a business that was incorporated a few years ago in 2016. We had a lot of investors, we had a lot of governmental funds. 5 years through this, we've got a huge asset. We've got accredited investors, but one day Grant said we should do crowdfunding. And I said, why? Crowdfunding is for small businesses, a startup, tech companies. They just want a little bit of amount of money. Why should we do that? And Grant said, Seta, is not fair. There's so many people that they want to contribute in this movement. There's so many people that they like to invest in hydrogen, but there aren't a lot of publicly traded hydrogen companies out there. And not everybody out there is accredited investor, or not everybody is a bank, but they like to have a part. They want to play a part. And then so this way we actually help the people who like to contribute. We're all constantly talking about global warming. A lot of people, they're going through movements, and we should teach everybody, we should tell everybody that if you have an idea, it's not all about talk and talk and talk. We have to take steps towards it. And I know there are a lot of younger generation out there that they want to do it, but they don't know what to do. So we decided, although a lot of people say no, we decided to actually have a crowdfunding, which crowdfunding is basically for those out there who like to have play a single part, an epsilon of a part in hydrogen production, because they want to make this change happen, and they believe in clean energy. So that's why I wanted you guys to see, because that's another unique thing about Proton. Although we've got big investors out there, but we are still doing crowdfunding because we want anybody out there to be able to join our team.
Create a path, yeah. And hydrogen is part of that path to solve this crisis. So I guess now we get into that inevitable Q&A.
Yeah, well, thank you for the informative talk. Before the Q&A, I quickly want to do our traditional group photo. So whoever wants to be in the photo, please turn their camera on. We're gonna take a group photo. And I'm gonna count 3, 2, and ready, 1. Okay, and we have two people who joined us. We have an HNCCET. If you can introduce yourself briefly, just tell us where you're calling in and what you do. And if you can't hear us, we have Naeem Yarkhan. Maybe you can introduce yourself, Naeem. Okay, they can't hear us, so we go to questions. We have one question actually coming from
Hello.
Neil. Yes. Oh, Naeem. Yeah, Naeem, can you please introduce yourself?
Oh, well, my background is from the drilling,
Yes.
and now after the retirement, I am working myself in a business, promoting business outside of Canada. A lot of things, not only one thing. I'm involved in many more businesses. Actually, I am looking forward to promote and take out this exciting technology to poor countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and it is tremendous. This is very good, and this will make these countries to stand on their feet. Anyhow, we are working on this one. There's a lot of challenges going on. So soon we will be able. Still, we are in connection with Chile, and so third world countries. I am working with third world countries. They have some economical problems, and they are depending on fuel. So this is the best thing to get rid of all those fuels, carbonated fuels, and to make environment in the same time healthy and friendly. So it has a two-way benefits in this one. Anyhow, we are working on this one.
Awesome. And where are you joining us from?
Calgary.
Awesome. And we have Rob. Rob, were you on the call before? Rob? Okay. We go to questions now. There was a question from Neil. What is the OPEX cost of the oxygen? Did you?
I'll answer in three ways. The first is that right now, our near-term plan is trucking in oxygen, and it's a lot. I'm not even gonna, it's embarrassing to, well, I don't know, maybe I won't overstate it, but it's we wouldn't want to do it at large scale this way. But at large scale, the next answer is there's a publicly available COSIA document that suggests 3.3 cents per kilogram. It's US, so maybe it's 4.5 or 4.2 or whatever it is today, cents per kilogram of oxygen. And that's for one 2,300 ton per day air separation unit, 2,300 tons being the oxygen component. And my deep-seated belief is that there's oxygen all over this planet, and there's easier, cheaper ways to drop the cost through scale. So if we know we're going to build a few thousand of these things worldwide, having an assembly line where you're controlling your supply chain and churning out huge modules that can clip together and all turn on reliably will help drop the cost. And there could be, we are actually in our future projects division investigating some of the alternative methods for air separation unit. We've already had some, let's say, paths close on us that we know we're not going to explore much further. And but there are some very compelling concepts out there that we believe that can collapse the price of oxygen, I think, to less than 1 cent per kilogram in the longer term as we get into that scale up phase.
Yeah, Grant, that question was from me. I'm Neil. So background is in fuel cells, so electrolysis is very similar. And you mentioned that as well. And I was a little bit surprised actually, because it is quite an expensive process as well. So the one you're looking at scaling, sounds like the concentrator approach is probably the lower cost. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll comment further. So there's a fourth thing to say. The first is that if our starting point is cryogenic distillation for a meaningful volume, then we have all of this cold liquid oxygen. And if we also have process heat at the same site, we can expand it dramatically in volume and pressure, way beyond what we need to get it in the reservoir, to the point where we can use Venturi effect to suck large volumes of other gases, up to a mass ratio potentially exceeding 2 to 1 of other gases to our initial starting oxygen. So that can be CO2 that we pull in, or it could be pure oxygen off of an electrolysis project.
Mm-hmm.
But you are right, the majority of the cost. So when we are aiming, and what our estimation in our models is about $0.50 per kilogram production of hydrogen, at least 3/4 of that cost comes from the oxygen injection. So if
Right.
it didn't, so that's the most expensive component of our process.
Of your OpEx, yeah.
Yeah, but it might even be 85%.
I'm actually follow-on question. For the Venturi drawing in CO2, are you talking about connecting to a pipeline coming from industry or just air at 400 ppm or whatever it is?
We're looking at both. So if you have a pipeline that people are pushing their CO2 in, that's the easiest from our perspective, to just hook onto somebody else's pipeline and jam it in the ground cheaper than they can. But then of course there are some intriguing direct air capture technologies and pathways. I'm not an expert on it, but I've seen some highly encouraging technological directions. I think that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in developing cheaper solutions for direct air capture of CO2. And I won't describe them in detail until we've applied for the Elon Musk carbon challenge.
Thanks.
Awesome. I think Ryan had another question too. Ryan, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to follow on from what Neil was asking about the OpEx of the O2 injection. I would imagine, and maybe I'm wrong here, that a lot of the energy cost of doing that is just the energy to cool the gas down, the air down to cryogenic temperatures. Wouldn't a lot of that, or well, all of that energy in principle be generated by proton produced hydrogen, which would be the cheapest electricity available on the market?
Yes.
Yes, that's true. So when we're talking about these prices, we're talking about scaled up and optimized process. And optimized means basically all of the energy that you need on a surface to run anything that requires electricity comes from our own H2, which let's say in an oil operation, that's not possible. The oil that you produce needs to be refined before you can use it as a source of energy, right? I think the only process that they can use their own product is natural gas producers, if the natural gas is clean enough. Otherwise, it doesn't need to be processed, or they don't have to remove the liquid from it. So, but the beauty of hydrogen, what we are producing, is that the hydrogen that we produce on the surface is going to be used as a source of energy for our own process as well. So once we get to the point that we can produce enough hydrogen that feeds the whole surface demand, then you can say that we're optimized and we can hit that prices that we're talking about now. Thank you. You're the one who was our fan, right? From San Francisco.
Yep.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, island power is part of what we'll be doing. So if you're running data centers, if you're doing various things that you don't have to move the electricity a long distance or move the hydrogen a long distance, then there's further savings. So there are some applications that we have customers trying to bang our door down to get us to give them enough hydrogen or electricity like right away, that it's an exciting time for us. It does feel overwhelming, but it's like far better than a few years ago when we were overwhelmed by how are we going to make payroll, questions like that.
Awesome. We have two guests joining us, and I would like to ask them to introduce themselves. We have Effie joining us. Would you like to say a few words, introducing yourself very quickly because we have to get to questions? She cannot hear us, or she... Anyway, we have Zahra as well. Do you want to introduce yourself? Just tell us who you are, what you do, and where you're calling from. Okay, I don't know what's going on with the sound system, with the connection. But before we get to Mehdi's question, I have one thing that I should have asked a little bit earlier. Just think about it for the end of the event. What should our takeaway be from your words? You don't have to say it now, but towards the end of the event, we're hoping to hear from you. Mehdi. Okay.
Hi. So my question: the goal of the getting the hydrogen is to like transfer it and use it as a hydrogen cells and these kind of things, or is it the goal is to produce electricity by it and like transfer the energy by electricity?
Would you like this one? So the main early goal is electricity. It's a huge market, and you need a lot of hydrogen. For example, 1,000 megawatts through a turbine needs just a significant amount, and you can underpin that with a huge electricity market that's growing quickly with electric vehicles and whatnot. So doing stuff at scale, if you want a power purchase agreement to finance the construction of your project, having an electrical customer at scale is much easier to scale up than trying to convince people to buy fuel cell vehicles and things like that. I like fuel cell vehicles because I hate air pollution, but it's not our first large-scale customer expectation.
There are two other limitations. One of them is transportation. We don't have hydrogen compatible pipelines yet, so we probably have to wait for that. The other one is the speed of policymakers is quite slow. So as an example, in Germany or a lot of places in Europe, they're mixing hydrogen with natural gas in the pipeline. We do have a natural gas pipeline coming to our facility that we could mix hydrogen with natural gas. But the regulatories hasn't changed yet, so we are not allowed to do that. So I mean, so what I'm saying is that the market is vast and there are a lot of potentials, but we are a little bit slow. So where we are living comparing to, we're way better than a lot of developing countries, but we are still behind some developed countries in Europe. So
ammonia is also, I think, a big potential.
Yeah.
So our air separation unit not only gives us oxygen, it gives us pure nitrogen. So if you have nitrogen and hydrogen at the same site, some extra process heat, there's a potential to be a very low cost ammonia producer as well.
Awesome. Azad had a comment and I should have come to it.
My question, first of all, thank you so much for really informative presentation. You mentioned the levelized cost of hydrogen for your system that is around 60 cents per kilogram, right? 60,
Yes.
right? And then what is the size that you consider to calculate this levelized cost of hydrogen?
I think we did based on 500 tons hydrogen.
This is what?
60 cents was lower than that. It was,
Yeah.
I think it was like a 50 to 80 tons
50,
a day.
yeah. But then, so you know what? It's gonna be linear over time. So we needed to hit to 60 tons per day hydrogen to get to this favorable cost. But then as you get bigger and bigger, I don't think it's gonna change that much. Slightly less than that. That's why we always give a range.
The range is
the range we say between 30 to 60 cents and 30
okay.
on how large.
I
scale.
always get in trouble. This is one of the tensions. I'm the dreamer who believes in a straight path to getting below 25 cents.
Yeah, and I said, no, we do 30 to 60. And then if we make it 20, then everybody's going to pat you in the back.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And then if maybe there is time, can I ask the second question?
Please.
I mean, how about the transportation of hydrogen? Because the price of hydrogen is not because of the production. The transportation of hydrogen is very costly. And as far as I know, it's just 2 to 3 times more than the cost of production. For example, if it is $1 or $2 per kilogram hydrogen production cost, the delivery is, let's say, $5 to $6, $7 per kilogram. Because actually your system is mostly good for central production of hydrogen, and then you need to transport this hydrogen to the other sectors, maybe by natural gas pipeline or maybe the other things. But have you ever thought about it and about the cost? Because this is also part of the cost, because actually people, when actually talk about the cost of hydrogen, they want the hydrogen cost in place. And yeah.
Sure. So if the hydrogen molecule is needed for some specific chemical production or recycling tires or whatever the application, where you don't just want the energy or the electricity, then, and you must have the hydrogen, we're looking at it a few ways. So we have a trailer that will be filling up in the coming days at our field site in Saskatchewan, but that's just compressed gas. So as you've pointed out, it's expensive to truck compressed gas because it's such a non-dense fluid. So the energy density volumetrically, even though it's very compelling, it's the highest on a mass basis, it's the worst on a volumetric basis. So you got this huge tube trailer that's hardly holding anything. So your deliverable economics are maybe 5 or 6 hour drive if you're lucky. If you liquefy it, and we have a huge advantage for liquefying because of our liquid oxygen, we can first do passive heat exchanging. So the energy requirement to get from minus 180 or so down to minus 253 is far less than what our competitors who are liquefying hydrogen have to contend with. So that gives us another giant advantage if we do liquefied hydrogen, and it also helps as a purification step. So we're very interested in pursuing that as an additional transportation method. Another way that we're evaluating is pipes. So if you have pure hydrogen and you put it in at minus 180, it will expand as it travels and warms. So from minus 180 to about 0, you're going to see more than a doubling in the volume of that hydrogen, which saves you a bunch of energy on compression costs. So it's basically A to B for very low cost if you have a dedicated hydrogen line. But if you don't, and you're dealing with an old natural gas infrastructure, you can put in some portion of hydrogen, and it varies by metallurgy and partial pressure of hydrogen, but you can put in most cases, at least 10%, sometimes like 60, some pipes can do, all the way. But one thing that you can do, there are a few clever ways to separate the hydrogen back out at the destination if you want to strip out the hydrogen for a specific purpose. And I think that will be, because of the enormous worldwide infrastructure for natural gas, that will increasingly be part of the conversation, but I think it's not going to be mainstream for another 2 years. And then of course the ammonia pathway. So like Saudi Arabia just sent a boatload of ammonia to Japan, and it was this big celebrated thing, but they've been shipping ammonia all over the world for 100 years or something. So it's not like this big surprise that you can ship ammonia to Japan, but it is the interesting part is that in Japan they're trying to actually remove the hydrogen from the ammonia and then use it for further processes in Japan. So we can lock it up chemically for storage as well. I personally believe the most elegant of all those solutions are liquid hydrogen transport, and well, other than electricity, is liquid hydrogen transport, and maybe to a lesser extent, gaseous hydrogen transport as a pure hydrogen, but opinions vary. There are many ways to do it though.
Awesome. We have 2 people have their hands up, and I think Naeem had his hands up, but it's now down. So I appreciate if the questions. Yes, and Rob is a fan from Krakow, all the way from Europe.
Hi, Rob.
Great to see you, Rob. First we go to Neil, then quickly to Mehdi, then quickly to Naeem if he still wants to ask his question.
Yeah. First, I was just going to mention, with the starting from a very low cost point gives you a lot more room for those transport options than, you say, electrolysis or even the blue hydrogen with the CCS. My question was different, though, sort of different direction. I wanted to dig in a little bit to the North Sea rights that you mentioned, and I'm curious about that. Is that also an abandoned type well resource? Are we talking about oil platforms that are ready to go, or what do you have there?
In many cases, yes. Platform abandonments can be like $1 billion or €1 billion or something. So if you can find a way to postpone that by a few decades, it's an easier sell relative to onshore, where you just bring in a rig, cement off the well, and you're out of there. So this enormous pre-investment in infrastructure and wells that platforms represent is very compelling. There's pipes, there's electric wires, there's all sorts of stuff under the North Sea. And it helped that our phone was ringing off the hook from companies from the North Sea region saying, what are we going to do about this carbon tax? You know, what an interesting process you have and all this kind of stuff. And we were trying to stay focused on Canada. And eventually we just said, okay, the best way to manage this is to just, you know, take it on properly. So we're staffing up with people who have offshore experience. You know, a lot of, yeah, I think the opportunity is vast. Those countries do represent the world's highest carbon taxes globally. And I think the fastest pace into whatever the next step of decarbonization is. So having our ear to the ground, doing stuff at large scale out there, I think is more beneficial than in jurisdictions that, for example, have no desire to decarbonize. Nobody's in at this point in time in North Dakota or Texas to stop flaring. They think it's cool and compelling and can make money, but in places where they're, you know, going to be out of business unless they rapidly adopt something, the urgency goes way up. And so we're trying to meet that need and help these businesses and help, you know, perpetuate our technology and proliferate it throughout that region.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, is that something that Proton's going alone and purchasing those rights? Are you doing some sort of joint venture with the company there?
The first one was actually sold in Europe about a year ago to a Swedish company. So there was a Swedish oil company that was super excited about this for onshore purposes. And I think they'll do very well. There are lots of discussions around joint ventures and things like that.
The UK was
Yeah.
the next problem.
Yeah, we're getting set up for all of our legal paperwork framework. So like, here's the form, fill it in, write the check, and either you go do it or we come in and do it. So
maybe a royalty scenario or something.
Yeah, and in fact, in general, and this is not a blanket statement by any means, but maybe I'll even retract that. In some cases, it's better to just buy the abandonment liability and the platform and the oil field and do it yourself, is to deal with a dying oil company. And not all of them are dying oil companies. There are some forward-looking ones that want to build, and we're interested in exploring growing with those ones. But if they're on their last legs and this is just their last kick of the can, throw us the keys and we'll take it from there.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you. Mehdi, you want to go next? And please make it as brief as you can.
Sure. So my background is primary engineering. So, and I agree with you completely. Like, I always thought that why we're burning oil when we can make it a ton of things and ton of chemicals and polymers from it. The next question is like about that. There's that can be processed further in the line or not?
Mehdi, can you repeat your question? You were cutting out for a second. Okay, I don't know what happened.
He's gone. Oh, he's back.
Sorry. Is it okay now?
Slightly better.
Yeah, sorry. So my question is about, I don't know, like, should I start from beginning or like?
Just a question.
Okay, so my question is about the carbon that will be in the reservoir. Like, will that be something that can be processed further in the line, or because of the introduction of the oxygen, then it will be technically not processable?
Yeah, there's going to be like, eventually you just forget about it as an oil reservoir. Some of ours will have reduction in permeability because we're blocking pore space with carbonate formation. So there's a reduction in permeability. There's going to be, we view in most of these, the primary target is we use the fuel, we oxidize the fuel to make hydrogen. It's not about enhanced oil recovery. Some of our licensees are more interested in that aspect because definitely if you add a bunch of CO2 and heat and pressure to an old heavy oil reservoir, it's going to really sing for a while in terms of oil production. But that's not our focus and kind of what we're going for, especially in the North Sea. I think in the North Sea, well, it'll be a combination of partnerships and purposes and jurisdictions. So different, we'll be adaptable and flexible for where we are.
Awesome. Naeem, you want to ask your question? Naeem? Naeem, can you hear us?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. I have one comment over here, and I want to ask, I heard this new technology, new term, crowdfunding. I don't know what is this thing is. So Seta, can you tell me about crowdfunding? I heard from you this word.
Yeah, crowdfunding. Do you want to talk about the terminologies? Crowdfunding is basically the only way. So, private companies, when you want to invest in private companies, you are supposed to be an accredited investor because it's regulated by the government. So not everybody can actually invest in a private company and buy shares in them. But there's only one way if you actually want a public member to, under regulation, governmental regulation, to buy shares in private companies is through crowdfunding. So crowdfunding is a method that's being regulated by the government. So anybody can actually buy shares. They can buy 1 share, 2 shares in a company. And at the end of the day, because everything goes through the government reviews and then releases the funds to us, they allow any member of society to purchase shares in a private company. Do I say right?
I think I'll introduce the term. It's called an exemption. So to invest in a private company, you have to have some sort of an exemption. Either you're an employee or you have you're come in through an accredited investor exemption, which means you have $1 million in financial assets or big salary or things like that. If you don't, let's say you just, don't have that criteria, one of the exemption paths that the government allows for investment into private companies in certain provinces by those provincial rules is the crowdfunding exemption. And so that's how we're opening the door to average Joe and average Jane up to a threshold and within the regulations that we're allowed by that exemption. For example, we have to use a designated and licensed platform. So we chose Wayblaze. We have to use a maximum of $1,500 per person. There are some specific criteria, so we just follow the formula, and that allows, just a regular person to do somewhere between, in our case, $375 up to $1,500.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Well, this exciting technology is very useful for third world countries. The economics depends upon the agriculture, like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and they have very low, weak reservoirs. Their reservoirs are not big. They have a small reservoir. A few million barrels of oil is left, which is unrecoverable easily. So this thing is exciting. So we are not thinking about anything high-fi like transportation or things, which is also good because in transportation you need a lot of things. But in this one, it's a good thing to work on this one. So this technology has a very bright future in these countries. Very bright future in these countries, really.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yes, what should be our takeaway? It's okay if you you can send it to me later, but I would like to.
Would you prefer to go first?
No, you go first.
Okay, I'll go first, and then Seta's going to go. My big takeaway that I tucked away for this moment is to reiterate air pollution. If you think about secondhand smoking, it was this big problem at a time where, in a century or two ago, there was horse poo in the towns, and everybody could see the horse poo and see the trouble it was causing themselves and their neighbors. They said, we need cars because it'll clean up all the horse poo. Well, the modern horse poo is tailpipe emissions that were not even knowing that we're poisoning our neighbors, our friends, and our family with. We don't do that. There are solutions that are zero emissions, zero air pollution. So I'm a big fan of driving that forward. And my takeaway for tonight is air pollution can and should be solved. And I encourage you all to push yourselves into those directions.
Well, my takeaway is that apparently we've got a lot of fans all over the world that at this time, they like to just come and listen to us and just see what we're up to. And it's quite interesting. So helps me work harder. And you never know, maybe the price that we're talking about is going to be half of what we're claiming, because now I'm quite motivated. So I'll work harder.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Can I? I just wanted to say, I just really quickly wanted to say I am incredibly proud that a beautiful, intelligent Iranian woman is behind this. Holy shit, you go, girl. Come on.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will spread the word on the crowdfunding.
Thank you.
Amazing job. I'm so proud.
Thank you.
I thought she was describing my new mullet. But,
the mullet is actually good, though.
How do you work on your Farsi? Then people think you're Persian. No, it was
yeah, as someone who was deprived of having a mullet, I basically I salute both of you from across the Georgia Strait, and thank you for coming. And I echo what Seta said. I'm looking forward to see and hear more of you both professionally and personally. And by the way, send us the links, and we're going to promote it on TikTok as well. And send us the takeaways by message so that we post it.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
everyone. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great night.